Welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective. On today's episode, we have Andrew Hacker. I first met Andrew Hacker at CSCCA. It was awesome to speak with him. I knew we had to get him on the podcast and speak with him. He's a younger coach, but uh, I want you to listen to how many times he said he's fortunate, or how many times he said he's been blessed, or how many times he said he was lucky. And it's always cool to me. I myself am a younger coach, but to hear coaches who are just starting out in the field talk about how fortunate they are and how lucky they are, because usually there's a lot of hard work that goes behind it, and people don't like to toot their own horns. But I think you can see from this episode, Andrew's a really great dude. He's at a great program at Sam Houston State, especially when he talks about the development piece. It was really cool just to hear his story and understand what he does with his teams over there at Sam Houston State. So, without further ado, thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. What's going on, Samson Strength Coach Collective listeners? On today's episode, we have Andrew Hacker, Assistant Strength and Conditioning Coach at Sam Houston State. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.
Absolutely, dude. I'm excited about it. We were just talking about, well, first of all, we originally met at CSCCA, so it was great to just speak with you
Yep.
then. But then
Yep.
we were talking about shirt sizes. This is a real dude we're
Yep.
talking to here, right? This is somebody who went from a large to XL when he became a strength coach. So I'm excited to get into it.
I love it. I love it. Yep.
Excellent. Well, can you kind of give us your background in strength and conditioning, and then what's brought you to your current position?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of started off, I played collegiate baseball at Utah Valley University. That was really my first experience with strength and conditioning. Um, while my time at Utah Valley, I had three different strength coaches. So I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I saw all three. But I was really blessed to have such a great strength coach to finish off my time at Utah Valley. He really did teach me that while we weren't very good at baseball, we could still develop and get better in the weight room. And he really taught us a lot more about, you know, it's so much more than just the sport, right? And that's what kind of sparked my interest in strength and conditioning in the first place. Throughout my time in undergrad, I was actually pre-med all 4 years. And it wasn't just, hey, I studied pre-med, but I also had hundreds of hours shadowing surgeons. And I got to see all of that inside the operating room. And so, uh, kind of my last year of baseball, when I got out of baseball, um, I just had that itch and I was like, I cannot get out of athletics. I have a passion for the sport I love. And while I thought medicine was super interesting, my parents have been in medicine, my grandparents, medicine's kind of been in the family. Um, I was like, hey, I can't get out of athletics. And so I interned with my strength coach. His name's Cameron Dietz. He's now at Cincinnati. Um, but he definitely had the biggest impact on me. Um, not only with my sport, but just as a person and growing. So interned with him, and I was like, "Yep, this is what I want to be doing." I got to see all the sports that he worked with. One of the best was, other than baseball, was wrestling. We didn't have football at Utah Valley, but we had wrestling. And those guys, I mean, if you've ever worked with a wrestling team, yeah, I mean, it's it's a lot of, hey, you have to take some weight off the bar rather than put more weight on the bar. And so it's a lot of fun, great training environment, and I knew that this is something I wanted to pursue. So he kind of pushed me really hard into applying to be a grad assistant at different places around the country. And I was still kind of on the fence, like, hey, do I really want to give up medicine or do I want to pursue strength and conditioning? And I was applying to all these spots. And I mean, you know how hard it is to get a job in this field. And I felt like I was applying everywhere and I wasn't getting a bunch of responses. And then I got a couple of interviews and not much was panning out. And I remember just praying to God, and I was like, "Hey, if I don't get this last interview with Sam Houston State, um, I'm gonna flip back and pursue medicine again, right? Because this is what I've been studying for the last 4 years." And sure enough, I got a call from Trevor Williams, my boss here at Sam Houston State. Set up the interview. It was a great interview. He really made the environment very friendly, less more less like an interview, more like a conversation. And I just felt that this was the place for me. So when he offered the job to me, it was a no-brainer. Next week, I was out here in Huntsville, Texas, as a graduate assistant, and then I think later on we're going to kind of touch on getting into that full-time assistant role. But that's kind of how I got here, and now I get to work with baseball, men's golf, women's golf, and football. So I'm blessed to have a great variety of sports here.
You're the rotational king over there, man, with the
Yes,
baseball and all the
definitely,
golfs. Yeah,
definitely. Yes, I love it. I love every
that's
bit of it.
awesome. Well, can you kind of just talk to me a little bit about having three different strength coaches throughout your career? I feel like that's a common theme, for mid-major schools to kind of experience, as or schools that don't necessarily have the Power Five allure, right? Even here
Absolutely.
at App State, I remember speaking with somebody, and they're like, "Yeah, you're my third strength coach in 3 years as well." Like, what was that experience like for you? How did that affect you as an athlete?
Absolutely. It's very different every year, right? So you have three different strength coaches, and I think um, what they could have done better was looking back on what we did that previous year, and that's was something that Cam did. He didn't just introduce something brand new to all of us. He looked back on what we had previously had done, and he kind of slowly integrated his program within, right? But having three different strength coaches, I mean, it is challenging for sure. Having a new program, new expectations every year. Every year it's something different, right? A lot of what I talk about today is going to be centered around baseball, right? So baseball, our hardest part of training is in the fall, right? So every fall is looking way different. We also had two different weight rooms. The first weight room that we used at Utah Valley had four racks, and the room was probably two or three times the size of my office or your office right now. It was very small, and somehow we managed to get all 30 dudes in there at the same time. And looking back, I'm not sure how he managed to make the flow work, but it worked. And then when Cam got there, we got a new weight room, 7 racks, indoor turf field. I mean, he had a lot of the bells and whistles, um, and so it was a great experience.
It's just so interesting to me, right? Because of how varied the field of strength and conditioning is as a whole, right? And
Definitely,
um, it, you can just look at some specific things and what people do, and I'm sure if you compared our programs, they'd be decently similar, but there's still a lot of main differences between them, right? And I've never seen your program,
absolutely,
and you've never seen mine. There's different philosophies, there's different things that go into the decision making about the process. So to go through three strength coaches, it's tough, man. And then also understand exactly like you said, like the fall is the hardest training time. Like, what are you getting out of the fall? Do you feel like you're actually growing in strength? Do you feel like you're actually getting better? I think it's something that is a little bit overlooked by other strength coaches, especially the point you brought up of actually bringing back and looking back at what the athletes did the previous year. That's something I didn't even really consider when I came here to App State. I just said, "Hey, man, we're taking my program, we're rolling with it." But like you
yeah,
said, I'm sure you felt that helped you continue to grow a little bit.
absolutely. And I also think that a lot of our field is a lot more than the sets and reps. It's a lot about who the coach is as a person, how he relates with the athletes. And I think that's something that they did a great job with. All three of the coaches that I did have, they really did make it more about sets and reps and taught us why we're doing what we're doing. So I was really appreciative of that as well. And that's something that I kind of take in with my training, being a young strength coach, being able to relate with these kids. Just because I'm only 3 years, 4 years removed from the field or from the sport, right? I can still relate. Hey, we're doing this because it relates to this. And I think that kind of earns a level of respect with some of these guys.
No, it certainly does, and I'm starting to reach the point though where I'm I can't relate as much, right? Like
Yeah,
I was talking with somebody, I can't remember even what I was like, "Oh man, you look like Frogger." He was doing something like a steep squat or something like that, and he's like, "What's Frogger?" And I
yeah,
was like, "Oh no, it's starting to." I can just feel myself getting washed slowly,
yeah.
but
That's
it
awesome.
makes a
That's
difference
funny.
when you can relate to the guys. Like you said, it's not all just about sets and reps; it's about how can you actually speak with
Absolutely,
them. Uh, you know,
absolutely.
you you speak about being a player. I think it's really important, and especially with a sport like baseball, because there's a really unique culture around baseball. I was fortunate enough to kind of work with baseball just for a brief time, and it's a different. it's a different sport, man. Like, especially how guys train and how they interact with each other. It's a really close bond. It seems like to me because you spend so much time together, and
Yeah,
so many just waking hours. What are some things that you've taken as your time as a player, and then now applying it to your time as a strength coach?
absolutely. I think kind of the first thing, and kind of what I just talked about, is having the empathy and, relating exactly how I felt, a couple years down the road, right? And translating that to how I'm going to program for their training right now, right? Especially with in season two, I know exactly what it feels like to play 56 games in X amount of weeks, right? A lot of the times we have weeks where we play 8 games in 10 days. And while baseball involves a lot of staying around, it is still very taxing on the body to stand around. Um, and so, kind of just relating that, hey, I know when to kind of pull back the reins a little bit and when kind of to push. And I think the guys sometimes they come in the weight room and they're feeling not so great, and I'm like, hey, we still got to push today. I think a lot of the guys um, do a really good job of that when I explain them why we have to do what we're doing. And then the next thing I think of is when I was a player, I wasn't the biggest lifter, but I did thoroughly enjoy it. I wasn't squatting 500 pounds. I wasn't deadlifting 700 like some of the guys, right? But when I hit a PR on my squat or when I hit a PR on the jump mat or whatever it may be, I was on top of the world for that day, right? And so for me, it's realizing that I can't be a coach and just celebrate the guy that squats 600, 500, whatever it may be. I can't celebrate just the strong guys or just the guys that are jumping 40s on the jump mat. But I also have to celebrate the guys that are getting small wins from that jump from 28 vertical to a 30 vertical. Like that's a big deal. And if I sit there and I'm a coach and I'm just like, yeah, well, buddy over here is jumping a 35, then I'm doing him a disservice too because I'm gonna take away the joy from training from him as well. So I think that's kind of the main thing. Um, and then just kind of driving competition. I think looking back on my time as an athlete again, just trying to figure out ways to motivate the kids that were unmotivated. Okay, because some of these kids don't want to be in the weight room. They don't. A lot of the kids do, but there are the kids that really think like this is punishment, right? That they just don't want to be in here. And so I think that goes hand in hand with teaching them why we're doing what we're doing. And I take a lot of that from Cam. I'm gonna say his name a lot, but he's been such a big mentor. Um, but really just teaching them why we're doing what we're doing and how do I relate this to what we're doing. And I think that drives a lot of the intent in the weight room when I explain.
And so for you, it's about the process of getting better. That's what it sounds like. It's not like not the highs and the of just the most jacked guys in the room, right? It's about the process of seeing these guys get better and improve every day.
Absolutely. I think the process is huge when it comes to the weight room because I'm gonna have these kids, some of these kids for 4 years, right? And I think that kind of goes in with my programming is I'm not just gonna cook them that first year. I'm gonna slowly progress them all 4 years so that they continue to see results all 4 years.
No, I mean that makes complete sense, and that's honestly the best way to program, in my opinion. Because again, you're taking into consideration their ability to grow over 4 years, and it's not just a small picture kind of freeze frame, if you will. Do you feel like
Absolutely.
being a former player, you can kind of level with the guys, especially the ones that you were just talking about, who maybe don't love the weight room? Like it's just a little bit easier for you to have those conversations with them.
It's definitely a little bit easier. I feel sometimes I find myself talking to them less as a coach. And sometimes I have to put myself in check and say, hey, I'm still a coach. But still finding those ways to level with them and say, we need to do this. Um, and whether you like it or not, we're going to do it. But really just telling them this is why we're doing it. And then that's kind of when they hop on board. But having those conversations, and I think also talking with the sport coach too, and I feel like that goes hand in hand with him kind of laying out our practice plan throughout the week. If he's going to run the guys all week long, but I'm also going to run them, I can kind of say, "Hey, coach, I know you want to, run them all week long because they've been messing up in the classroom or something, but I have to get my job done too as well, and this is what I need to be done." So if we can find that middle ground where he can still have an intense practice, but I can still also get what I need to get done, I think that's kind of where the leveling aspect plays in.
Yeah. So do you think that like just helps you with your conversations with the coach as well too, or maybe even add just a little bit more of legitimacy about what you're saying because of your experience?
Yes, definitely. I think that when I talk with the coaches, I can relate back to my time as a player. And sometimes he thinks that I might just be trying to get them out of some extra conditioning at the end. But I think really just teaching them why, again, I think the why is big. And once I teach him why or tell him why, he's going to kind of understand a little bit more about what the goal is.
Now, how do you balance exactly like what you just mentioned? Like sometimes it's hard not to talk to him as a coach. It's more of a person to person, right? Which is a lot of the coaching interactions as well. But as a younger coach, working with a sport that was the sport that you played and you're just a few years removed from, how do you balance that yourself?
No, absolutely. I think there are days I definitely have to put a check on myself, and just say, "Hey, I'm still a coach." And it is tough sometimes, and I think all the young coaches out there um, can relate. I mean, I'm only 24 years old right now. I'm very blessed to coach a very high level collegiate baseball team, but at the same time, there are days I do have to check myself and say, "Hey, I need to establish the discipline and the culture on this team. And if I slip up, then the whole team's going to be a disaster, right? So I have to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to establish that discipline and keep that discipline and the culture that we have here at Sam Houston.
So that's just more of a daily check for you, just to check yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
Yep.
I mean, it's good for all strength coaches to do, right? I mean, that's kind of your whole
Definitely.
job is, and see,
Definitely.
one of the biggest things I've been speaking with other people about recently, and sorry to listeners, I just coughed straight in the mic, but one of the biggest things I've kind of noticed and the themes I've seen is really about the practice what you preach, principle is that ultimately you are the leader. And I think it's the way you carry yourself is the true message that you send. And so ultimately you do have to be able to check yourself and you have to be able to have real conversations with yourself too, right? You got to be honest on the ways
Yep.
that you may not be living up to the standards that you want to specifically live up to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you alluded to this earlier in the podcast too, right? But it's always interesting for me, and I always think it's a really good marker of a great coach, right? Somebody who is able to kind of level up, so to speak, within their position. You went from being a GA to a full time assistant strength coach. What was that process like for you? What went into that process from the work that you did, and then kind of what do you think helped you to level up, so to speak?
Absolutely. So when I first got here at Sam Houston, my boss, Trevor Williams, and he's gonna listen to this, but he was super hard on me. He was super hard on me. There were days I'd come in, I thought he hated me. I thought I was gonna get fired. But I really did. And now looking back, I think it was him just making sure that I was ready for the demands of this job. Here at Sam Houston, we only have five strength coaches for 17 sports. We all work out of the same weight room. Um, it's pretty much all hands on deck with football, and that takes up most of our days. But he really was hard on me. The day I walked in, he said, "Hey, you have 2 months to pass your CSCS exam. If you don't pass, you're fired." And whether he was kidding or not, as a new kid on the block, I was not going to take that as a joke. So I studied like my life depended on it. I did end up passing the CSCS on the first try, which I'm very lucky and fortunate um, to say that. And I want to say that that same week, he walked into my office and he put a textbook down on my desk and he said, "Here's the CSCCA textbook. You're taking the exam here in about a couple months." I forget what month this was, but it was only a couple months away. He said, "Here's the CSCA book. Got to take the exam. If you don't pass, you're fired." And on that one, I think he was kidding, um, but we kind of laughed at that. But I ended up passing the CSCCA exam as well. And I think it was really when I first got here, just establishing that I'm going to be here every day, day in and day out, working at the same level, and just showing him that. this is a spot that I want to be at, and this is a spot that I'm going to work, extremely hard at. And I think he saw kind of how I would coach. Now, first, it was definitely flat in your face. There were definitely points where Trevor and then my other boss, Parker Whiteman, he has now moved on. Um, but he was the head strength and conditioning coach for our football team. First week, he's like, "Hey, Hack, you're leading the football lift today," and I had never led any lift, and so it was just an interesting experience. But that definitely has led me to be the coach I am today and being super comfortable in front of all of these athletes, and finding out who I really was as a coach. And so I think it was really just me establishing who I was and how willing I was to learn from all the other coaches. And I think there were times that my coworkers tested me to see if I was really ready to stay in this position. Um, and I feel like I proved to them that, I could, right? And so my coworker, her name's Haley Roberts, she was in my position before me. She got a internship with the Tennessee Titans. And so when she took that internship, we all kind of looked at each other knowing that she's probably not coming back, right? Like that's a pretty big deal. So she goes out to Tennessee and she kills it like we knew she would. And I remember Trevor's phone lit up and it said Haley. It was at the end of the summer and we all kind of knew what was happening. And so she told Trevor, it was on speaker, she's like, "Hey, they offered me a job with the Tennessee Titans." And so Trevor, after we all talked with her, we hung up, or he hung up the phone. He looked at me and said, "You have the job if you want it." And then he smirked and then walked away. And I would be lying if I said I would be a little bit upset if he didn't at least consider me for the job. Um, but I definitely was surprised that it was a no-brainer for him in the sense that he offered me on the spot. But I think it was ultimately he knew exactly what he was going to get from me, and he knew how much I love the job, and how much I love the people that I work with, and the athletes, and the coaches that we have on staff too. I'm very blessed to have such a good support system here.
That's such a great story, man. I love that, and he's a
Yeah, it's
character. He's
awesome.
cracking me up just hearing
He
about
is
this
awesome.
experience. But it sounds like I guarantee you, he probably would have actually fired you if you failed your CSCS at least the first time.
The CSCS definitely, definitely the CSCS. But no, I'm very blessed to work here. I work with some of the most amazing guys, not only just coaches, but Trevor's developed me as a man too. So very blessed to be here.
That's awesome, man. And, but those are the people who care about you the most, right? The ones who are going to be real with you, and the ones who are going to, you know, just be honest and explain exactly what you need to do, and be willing to throw you in the fire, and then help you out afterwards, right? Because there's a difference. Because I've been thrown in the fire before, just to get thrown in the fire and then not give them
Yep,
constructive feedback versus when you
yep,
get, like you said, fall flat on your face, then somebody picks you back up and says, all right, well, you're going to do it again tomorrow. And here's what sucked. And maybe you can coach that up.
yep.
That's a big difference to me.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it just was kind of a combination of everything, falling flat in the face, and then all the other coaches also just kind of challenging me every day, not in a bad way, but just challenging my knowledge and saying these are the areas you need to grow in, and then proving to them that I can improve in those areas.
Yeah, but that's how you grow the most, right? Is just getting challenged, and does it actually matter to you? And are you going to bow up
Yeah,
and get the things done? Right?
yeah.
I'll never forget my CSCS. My internship director at the time, well, I guess he was the head strength and conditioning coach. Craig Fitzgerald paid for my CSCS, and I'll never forget like going to
Nice.
take that exam, and I was like, "That's I have to pass. Like, there's no way." And it wasn't like
Yeah,
out of the Tennessee budget; it was out of his own pocket, and so I called him afterwards. I told him I passed. I was terrified, you know, just to even just have that call because he's just an intense dude. And he was like, "Really, you passed?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Cool." He's like, "I'll see you at work." It was just really casual. So, but those are the people who teach you
I
the
love
most,
it.
and those are the people who gets you excited because I think it's interesting because when you are successful and you live up to their expectations, it's not like this big, like, "Oh, amazing, you're so amazing, you did such a great job." It's like, "All right, great job. Move on to the next thing. Let's keep getting better because there's always something to get better at."
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of getting better, another thing that they were really tough on me was my coaching voice, especially
Ah,
being new to the field. Um, kind of during the warm-ups or something, they'd kind of turn up the volume a little bit as I was trying to coach, just to see if I had it in me. And Coach Parker Whiteman, he'd tell me like, "Hey, you just got to work on your coaching voice." I'm like, "Coach, I'm yelling at the top of my lungs." Looking back now, I was not yelling. I didn't know what a coaching voice was. I was just talking very loudly, and so they just done a really good job of developing me as a coach.
That's awesome, man. I remember it was a couple weeks ago. I was visiting one of my buddies. I was the best man in his wedding, and I was over there, and I just said something like kind of just across the room because it was like a big kind of circle. Everybody's sitting there, and they're like, "Wow, you have a really commanding voice." And I was like, "Yeah, I have no choice. I
Yeah,
literally would never get anything done if I didn't, because they wouldn't
yeah.
listen to me." So that's a big piece behind it too.
Yeah.
Wow.
When I go home, I'm kind of known as a more quiet guy. So when I go home, I actually had my mom, she wanted to observe a session in the weight room, and she was sitting at my desk, and so I started coaching. And like halfway through, she walked out and she said, "I didn't even recognize your voice." And it was just kind of a funny moment knowing that, you know, I'm still a quiet guy outside of the weight room, outside of work. But when I get in here, I can change my
Yeah.
voice and command a room.
Well, that's what it's all about, man. And also screw, coaching in front of a mentor or anything. I think the most nervous I'd be would be coaching in front of my mom. That must have been
No kidding.
exhilarating.
Yeah, no. So I'm trying to coach these football guys, right? And I just see my mom kind of peer out of the corner, and I see her stick her phone up like she's trying to record me. I'm like, Ma, what
Yeah.
are you doing? Just embarrassing me. But
Dude, she's
nah, she's
proud.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
she is. She is.
This
But
it's funny because it makes me think back now. When I first started dating my now fiance, this was 5 years ago. She was a nutrition worker, and so she was working behind the desk of the nutrition fueling station, and then I'm over here coaching for the first time. So I definitely was like lowered my voice a little bit, and tried to just sound like a little bit more like a dude, and
yep,
so. But still, I would
that's
rather coach in front
awesome.
of her than my mom at the time. That's awesome. It just,
That is
it's a lot of
awesome.
people who are proud of you and a lot of people who care. Wh- Uh,
Absolutely.
what is the biggest difference you've noticed since becoming a full time coach versus when you were a GA?
That's a great question. Um, I think the amount of work that I do is still going to be the same. The level of effort I put in everything is still going to be the exact same. When I was a GA, I had to wash the towels. I had to do that kind of stuff. Right now, we don't have a GA, so I'm still doing that part, and I'm not going to complain about it. Um, the thing that I see the difference the most, I think, is the level of respect with the athletes that may not know me yet, right? So new athletes walk in the door, they hear I'm a graduate assistant, fresh out of college. They may not give that same respect right away that they would hearing that I'm a full-time assistant. I think that's the first thing that kind of pops into my mind. Um, Other than that, I mean, it's really nice to have my own desk with a computer on it, and not having to have the little desk in the corner. But I'm very blessed to have this opportunity. And I think other than that, not much really has changed. I mean, I work with the same sports. When I got promoted to full time, Trevor, baseball was Trevor's sport, right? That's been his baby. And I think when he promoted me to full time, he knew that me taking over baseball would be best for my career path. So he gave me full control over baseball. So now I'm the only strength coach that works with our baseball program. So that's probably the biggest difference, is him giving me the ability to have full reign over our baseball team. Um, but other than that, I mean, it's been pretty similar.
Dude, those are two sides of a really, really solid, I mean, really great program. First is understanding that you're not treated much differently as a GA versus an assistant, right? Because it just shows the
Yep.
importance that they place on people who are not guaranteed to be there for the rest of their
Yep.
careers, right? Nobody's guaranteed, but ultimately GAs, it's up after 2 years. So then
Yep.
to not get treated that differently, the desk bump is always nice, right? Then that's
Yeah.
a classic thing you'll see everywhere. I remember my first desk was
Yep.
the weight room bench. It definitely gave me scoliosis. But it's a great program because again, they treat you like a full time coach. There's honestly really not that
Absolutely.
much of a difference. And then two, to understand that this is something he held near and dear to his heart with having baseball, but then to be able to hand that program over because it's something that he knows would help elevate your career, it really I think speaks highly and shows the quality of mentors that you had. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you spoke about being a young coach. I'm a young coach as well. A big thing for me this summer has just been trying to hone my craft and get a little bit better, and just understand what are some areas I can improve upon. What are some things that you've been looking at as you are coming up in your career?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first thing I kind of think about is kind of the books. There's so much knowledge out there, right? Especially with social media, being at, having a computer on our phone. It's pretty incredible. But the first thing I think about is all the books that have been published. And so my favorite book that I've read, and it's going to be my favorite book when, I'm a director one day. Um, it's Movement Over Maxes by Zach DeChant. And that's just because it's so solid at progressing and regressing basic movement patterns, right? And I think as a young coach, we are always looking to be the next somebody, right? We want to be the guy that creates the next training program or the training system, right? And it's important for us to realize to take a step back and just hammer the basics, right? And so I think that book and other books like that are going to be super big on perfecting my craft. And then another thing I would say is kind of just observing and listening to other coaches around me, right? And that's another thing that I took very seriously when I was a GA and when I first got here and when I was an intern as well, right? How do other people coach their athletes? What do their athletes respond, or how do their athletes respond to their coaching? And so when I was here, first couple months as a GA, I wasn't really coaching much. I was kind of just observing, and that's what they wanted me to do. And so I was listening to all the different coaches we have on staff communicate with their athletes. And I'd take something from Coach Keon, I'd take something from Trevor, I'd take something from Parker. And that's kind of shaped who I am today as a coach, taking little aspects and, hey, I like this, I didn't like this. And that's kind of shaped how I coach the athletes. Um, but those are the two biggest things I'd say, other than podcasts like this. I mean, there's so much information out there. Um, but I would really just say hammering the basics and keeping it simple.
I mean, that's exactly it. And you bring up such a great point. Everybody wants to be. I mean, I would be lying if I sat here and told you I didn't want to be the best basketball strength coach in the country. That's a lie,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I've been fortunate enough to be able to speak with some of the best basketball strength coaches in the country. I think that's first of all, it's subjective, so
Yeah.
it's tough to become the best, right? But
Yeah.
then second of all, with guys who would be considered, most people's top five for coaches, and it's so interesting. Like I've even asked them the question, like, did you want to be the best, when you were younger? And they're like, yeah, for sure. But all I focused on was showing up every day and doing a really good job. And then it kind of just fell into my lap that the next position came, and then the next position came after that. And then I ended up having a lot of people ask me about, what I do and what our training program looks like. And then it kind of just developed from there. And so when you say the basics, I think that's such a solid and great point because it's all about, can you just show up every day? Can you master the basics? And that's what's going to help you one, stay in the career too, right? Because you're not so worried about being the best of all time and you're not going to burn yourself out. Because if I had worried about that every day, I would be, I mean, I don't even know what I'd be doing right now. I'd probably be helping them build the parking deck they're building outside of our, weight room right now. But ultimately, can you hammer the basics down? Can you master those? And then can you just show up every day and execute the basics as well too? I think that's the most fun part of being a younger coach is just like, can you come in every day and be consistent and give the same product every single day? And then after that, that's where you can get fancy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's so much that goes, into honing our craft, but I've touched on a lot of things already, and one of the biggest things I've talked about is teaching the why, right? So making sure that when I am implementing my program this coming fall, right, with the guys that are coming in, making sure they understand why we're doing what we're doing, especially these new incoming freshmen who they're probably all they've seen on Instagram and social media is guys squatting 405, right? But I'm gonna have them sit here and go lateral pogos, and they've never seen it and they feel dumb doing it, right? But just explaining why we're doing what we're doing, why it's healthy, why it's gonna make them more durable athlete. So I think those are kind of the biggest things that I think of.
Was that why a really big piece for you when you were an athlete?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably as you could tell, I keep saying that, but I was big on understanding what we're doing. Um, And I think that's where a lot of my experience in the weight room came from was not that internship I had with Cam, was the years I had with him before, right? Because I wouldn't sit there and drill him with questions after, but he would just explain exactly what we're doing, how this is going to translate directly over to what we're doing out there, and then seeing those results actually take place on the field was like, well, this is something really cool. So yeah, definitely.
It's funny you bring up the social media aspect because obviously being in basketball, my social media is basketball strength coaches. The one baseball strength coach I follow is Cam.
Oh yeah, no way.
Yeah, no joke.
That's
You said the
awesome.
name at the beginning. I was like, that's incredibly familiar. And then I was like, oh yeah. And you said Cincinnati, and then maybe click because he just moved over from Eastern Michigan, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, I
Yeah.
follow. He's the only one I follow. So you've got a
That's
great
awesome.
mentor there. Well,
Yeah,
one thing that you can see from your Instagram is you like your quotes. I'm curious.
I do.
What's your favorite weight room quote?
My favorite weight room quote. Yes. So we have a quote board when you walk in. I love having a quote up there. Just some simple when the athletes walk in the door, they can read it. And that's from Parker Whiteman. He was here before me, and he's now the head strength coach for football at Jacksonville State. So I kind of stole that from him. But my favorite, and it's something I tell all the recruits, it's something that I tell all the guys, is if you want to be great at anything in life, you have to do more than what's required of you, right? And that's not just your sport. That's not just in the weight room. That's with all aspects of life, right? And I think it's so applicable to everybody that's listening, not just strength coaches, but that's with being a great husband, a great father, a great son, a great, daughter, wife, mother, whatever it may be. And so that's something I speak a lot about.
I love the quote board. And, I've heard other coaches because I do the same thing here. We've always got a quote up, and I've heard other coaches kind of make fun of me a little bit. Like, oh, you need the quote to get motivated. And say things like that.
Yep,
But what's so interesting to me about it is like sometimes, yeah, sometimes I do need the quote to get motivated because sometimes I'm gonna just come
absolutely.
in and try to go through the motions. But even as somebody who loves lifting, like I love lifting, I love the whole process of it. I've been lifting for I mean, wow, I came in, at least 15 years now. It's been fantastic for me. But sometimes I got to read a quote to get motivated. Sometimes I got to watch Ronnie Coleman lift a little bit so I can get excited to go lift because at
Absolutely.
the end of the day, like it's a tough process. And so imagine an athlete now who, like you said, there's some guys who hate the weight room and they see it as punishment to even be in there. And so why not give them a
Yep,
quote? Why not give them a little juice to get them excited for the day?
absolutely. And it's super rewarding also too when they talk about the quote too. You'll
Yeah.
hear them sometimes throughout the lift, and you'll hear them talk about the quote. Or one of my favorites is kind of scrolling through social media after work and seeing it on their stories. I think it's so little, but it's something that makes my day too as well. Knowing that quote they read it and it positively impacted their day, and that's kind of just your hope is that it kind of flips a switch in some of those athletes' minds, right? And while it may be something little and it may be you know, kind of funny to other coaches that may be like, hey, you kind of poke fun at you for writing the quote up. If it impacts one person, then that's all that matters, right? We have 500 athletes that walk in this door every day. If I can just impact one athlete, it's worth it. So
And what would it negatively impact? Ultimately, like what
exactly,
unless the guy was a total jerk, and then just like that ruined
exactly.
his day to see a motivating quote, and that would
Yep,
just be somebody who's not going to get better anyway. So why, if it does help one
yep,
person, why not do it every day? Our team's,
absolutely.
our basketball team's favorite is get right or get left. Just very simple.
Nice. Yep,
So
yep. I
they put
love
that
it.
up there one day, and I was like, all right, I guess this is the one we're all sticking with because that's all they keep repeating.
I love it. And then sometimes we'll have athletes reach out and say, "Hey, I got a quote for you." So I think that's super important too, is some of these guys will go throughout their day and they'll hear something and they say, "Hey, I think Coach Hack would love to put this on his quote board." And they'll text me at night, "Hey, this is the quote for tomorrow." I'm like, "Awesome,
Yeah.
let's do it." So I think that's super special too.
Well, it's really cool, man, because exactly like you just said, like, you know what you're trying to preach or whatever message you're trying to send is getting across and it's being understood and it's being comprehended. Like, that makes a big difference, seriously.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Coach Hack, I didn't know that's what they called you, but now that's all I'm going to refer to you as from here on out.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you coming on, man. It's been fun to get to know you more, and especially hear about the program at Sam Houston State's. It sounds like it's an awesome deal. I wasn't very familiar even when I was over at Texas Tech, so it's always fun for me, and that's why I love doing this podcast is to learn more and understand more about different programs and coaches. So thank you for coming on, man. If anybody wants to reach out or follow you on social media or maybe even see pick some pictures of the quote board, what would be best way to do that?
yeah. So you can find me on Instagram, and that would be Andrew_Hacker. Um, I love to post, like I said, my daily quote. Um, but reach out on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter, Andrew_Hacker_. Those are probably the best ways to reach out. If you want to email me, it would be amh218@shsu.edu. I'd love for people to reach out and connect. But other than that, I appreciate you having me on here. It's something
Abs-
definitely out of my comfort zone. This is, like we're talking about being a young strength coach. This is something that definitely out of my comfort zone, but I'm glad I did it, and I'm appreciative that you had me on.
well, you crushed it, dude. I'm glad you came on. Seriously,
Appreciate you.
it's always great to talk with coaches, and I don't know. That's why I like doing this podcast so much, is because I'm not going to drill you on your third phase of your fifth cycle or whatever, man. I just want to get to know you, and I hope the listeners feel the same. So I
Yeah,
appreciate it, man. Well, thank you very much for coming
yeah,
on.
absolutely, absolutely. I appreciate you having me.